This video is brought to you by Sailrite. Installing binding around a circle has always been difficult. Not now. Many of our customers have been asking for a right angle binder. A right angle binder makes it possible to install binding around an inside curve like a circle. Here you can see Brian sewing a circle for a window in his Dodger using the new right angle binder from Sailrite. The right angle binder is also great for a scalloped edge, like on an awning. Here you can see the right angle binder working on putting on a curved scalloped edge for an awning. When sewing binding on a scalloped edge, Sunbrella acrylic braid soft binding is typically used. Sailrite stocks it in many colors. The Sunbrella acrylic braid soft binding is 13/16 of an inch wide. For best results, we recommend stretching the width of the soft binding by hand prior to installing it in the right angle binder. Starting the soft binding through the feeder can be rather difficult. Cutting the corners like this can help you initially feed it through the feeder easily. The opening designed in the front of the feeder allows you to use an object like a screwdriver to help feed your binding through the feeder. Once the Sunbrella acrylic braid soft binding is fed through the feeder, then grab the end of the binding and pull it straight out, then pull it 90 degrees underneath the presser feet of your sewing machine. We'll now demonstrate sewing this acrylic soft binding using a zigzag stitch. We'll have to make a little change to the binder position to move it a little bit more to the left. We'll switch the stitch width lever to a full zigzag and we'll reduce the stitch length to approximately a 3mm zigzag stitch. You'll notice we're using the reverse stop and lock knob on this ultra-feed sewing machine. It is always recommended that you sew off a little bit of the binding to ensure that your stitch is in the right position. Now let's feed that Sunbrella marine grade fabric into the right angle binder. Here we are sewing with the zigzag stitch. This will ensure that we always catch the acrylic braid soft binding. You'll notice off to the right that there's a curly Q wire finger. This is to help feed the binding into the feeder. Sometimes we go through all the fingers and sometimes we do not. For vinyl binding, we find that it's best not to go through all the fingers as it feeds easier. You may want to experiment with your particular application. Here we are coming to the end of our project. You'll notice that you can only do a few stitches in reverse because the binding does not want to feed in a reverse manner through the feeder. But you can get a few reverse stitches in to secure your stitching. Here is the underside, and you notice the binding did not fold perfectly, which is normal for an acrylic braid soft binding. So that's why we recommend using a zigzag if your sewing machine has that. The acrylic soft braid binding feeds very well through this right angle binder, but it is rather soft, so it may not fold perfectly. Using a zigzag stitch will ensure that you're always catching the binding. We'll now demonstrate the right angle binder using the Surelast binding. This is a 3/4 inch binding. There's no need to cut wedges in this. It feeds through the binder easily. We pull it through and then pull it at a 90-degree angle underneath the presser foot of your sewing machine. Again, we're going to sample this on the UltraFeed LSZ-1 sewing machine. In this application, we've taken that Sunbrella marine grade fabric and cut a circle in it. We're going to show you how easy it is to sew a binding around a circle. We've moved the binder a little bit to the right and secured it down, and we moved the needle bar frame to the right and are sewing with a straight stitch. When sewing circles, Sailrite prefers to use the Surelast binding or the Stamoid binding. Sewing circles is one of the major advantages of using this new right angle binder from Sailrite. The right angle binder is also perfect for inside curves. The standard binder that Sailrite's been selling for years will not work for inside curves or circles. This is a 3/4 inch swing away binder. This is a standard binder that Sailrite's been selling for years. And you'll notice that as we try to feed the binding onto this scalloped edge, it will not work. The binder gets in the way. That's why you need a right angle binder to accomplish inside curves. So here we are back to the right angle binder, which works perfectly for these inside curves. We'll cut off the excess binding where we started prior to sewing up to that point, and we'll also cut a little bit of the ridge or the fold section of that binding so that we can join the two pieces together more smoothly. So here we are sewing up to that cutoff, or where we started the binding. We want to ensure that it's pushed into the binder and continue sewing. As we discussed earlier, you can only do a few stitches in reverse to lock your stitch in place because the binding does not want to feed through the feeder in a reverse manner. We'll pull this out from underneath the sewing machine and cut off the excess binding. After trimming the point where we cut off the excess binding so that it's a little bit more flush, let's take a look at our job. Sewing binding on a circle to finish it off could not easily be done with the standard binder that Sailrite's been selling for years, nor can a standard binder sew inside curves. But now, with the new right angle binder, it can easily be accomplished. Here we have the right angle binder mounted to the Ultrafeed LS1 sewing machine. And again, we're sewing a circle and sewing binding around the perimeter of the circle. We're using the Surelast binding here for this application. And before we get to the part where we started, we want to trim that binding so that it lays over the top of this binding nicely. So we'll trim a little wedge there at the end. This will help to create a smooth transition when we join the binding at its starting point. And here we are at the beginning point where we've started our stitches, and we sew approximately 1 inch and then do a little bit of reversing there. You can only go in reverse a few stitches because the binding does not want to feed in the opposite direction well through the feeder. Then we'll trim up our work so it looks great, and as you can see, the Ultrafeed LS1 sewing machine works great with a right angle binder and the Surelast binding from Sailrite. Here we've installed the right angle binder on the Sailrite 111 sewing machine. This is a straight stitch, compound walking foot sewing machine, and we're going to be sewing the stamoid binding here. The stamoid binding is inserted exactly the same way as done previously. And here you can see Brian sewing a window into his Dodger. This is a round window where he'll be installing the glass on top of the binding in a later step. Here he is reversing as he's come up to the part where he first started sewing the binding onto the circle. And let's take a look to see what the job looks like. As you can see by our results, the stamoid binding works perfectly in the new right angle binder. Now all that Brian has to do is install the vinyl window material on top of this window opening. You'll find a separate video showing how to install the right angle binder on your sewing machine. If you'd like a little bit more information of how to install the binder, be sure to watch that video as well. Order the right angle binder 3/4 inch from Sailrite today. It's your loyal patronage to Sailrite that makes these free videos available. Thanks for your support.